So now it is my pleasure to introduce to you our panelists for today. Sitting this way is Mr. Sidney Armstrong, Head of Department for Economics at the University of Guyana. He has a master's degree in Development Economics from University of Queensland, Australia.
Good evening, everyone. Let me first start by thanking the organizers of this discussion, this discourse, surrounding a very important, interesting topic. I was tasked to look at a comparison between the oil and gas sector, the oil sector, and the bauxite sector. And some may say that the comparison may not be one that is valid, simply because when you look at the history of bauxite, it's been over a century bauxite has been involved in our country. But then when you look at the oil sector, it is only emerging. In terms of production, it's only months old. However, the discussion is about how do we learn from what we experienced during the bauxite era, and heading into the oil and gas area, how can we take forward the lessons learned? My presentation starts by giving a brief historical account of the bauxite in Guyana. Then I will look at the economic overview of the bauxite sector. Moving straight into the oil sector, I'll give an overview, an economic overview. And then I will discuss from what I would have presented, the things that we can take forward moving into oil and gas. Like Isabella indicated in her brief remarks, that bauxite has over a century in terms of its existence in Guyana. It can be dated back all the way to the 1940s, to 14, when you had Demba securing the lease in the Mackenzie area. But operation actually started around 1917. Around 1942, you had the Barbies Bauxite Company operating in Kukwani, looking at a chemically grade bauxite. In 1956, you had the construction of the refinery in Mackenzie. In 1971, we started the nationalization process. So Demba was nationalized and renamed to Guyana Bauxite Company, GAIBA. In 1975, you had the nationalization of the Barbies Bauxite Company, renamed to Burman. In 1982, the refinery that we constructed ceased operation. Very important for us to place emphasis on that. And then in 1998, we began the process of reprivatization of the industry. Today, when we talk about bauxite operation, it's important that I've mentioned the big companies that are involved in the mining. You have the UC Rusal, the United Company Rusal, operating up the Barbies River. You have Bauxite, the Chinese company, operating in Lindan. And you have Jinman, which is Guyana Industrial Minerals. This here, recent addition to the mining portfolio, operating in the Essequibo. I want to give you a sense of production from bauxite. When you trace the history, and you go back, and according to my slide, up to 1999, you can see something that is similar. Something is very important there. That apart from possibly 2 years, 2010 and 2009, bauxite production has maintained a level about 1.5 million tons. It's projected to increase moving beyond 2018. When we look at the export earnings coming from bauxite, it's very important to note that if you look at from year 2007 all the way to 2018, on average, the expected earnings was over 100 million US. So this is when sugar and all of the other areas are not doing so well. You still had foreign exchange coming from bauxite. This is the sad part, however. When you look at the contribution of bauxite to our GDP, it has been steadily declining. In the glorious years from my slide here, looking back to the 90s, you see that its contribution towards GDP soared around 9%, 8% in the earlies. But then when you look at the contribution today, it is merely above 1%. Now, it is not saying that the production is declining. It is just saying that there are other sectors that have been emerging, and more importance have been placed on those sectors. But we can't forget bauxite, because in the dark times, it was bauxite that presented many of the opportunities. In terms of the number of persons employed, I've managed to get some data for 4 important years, and it's a signal in terms of employment in bauxite. So if you go back to around 1998, we had an estimated number of about 3,000 persons employed in bauxite. But then you fast forward that to today, that number is almost half. So you have about 1,300, somewhere thereabout, 1,380 persons employed in the bauxite industry. It's a sign, and then we must pay careful attention to that sign. And I'll discuss that in a few. Looking at the big companies in Guyana, this is for 2019, you have Rusal employing about 500 persons. You have Bauxite, about 650 persons, and Genmine, about 238 persons. I want to touch on Genmine. So we have the Bonasiga project, which started in 2019. And there's a couple of things striking about that project. So it started up via Sequibel. And what was estimated from the discussion is that this project is estimated to pump in Guyana over the next 15 years, $387 million US. In addition, the government revenues, government is expected to collect over the next 15 years about $50 million US. The company pledged to inject within the community that it's operating in terms of corporate social responsibility, an estimated amount of $1.3 million US. So this is to deal with community development aspect. And this is what bauxite is all about. When you check what happened in Linden, for example, you've seen a lot of injection through the corporate social aspect, corporate social responsibility in Linden. We fast forward to oil. 2015, big news for Guyana. ExxonMobil announced, wow, large oil finds in the Atlantic off the coast in Guyana. To date, as of February, they've announced that from 2015 to now, they have 16 oil finds, and the estimated amount of oil is some way above, a little bit above 8 billion barrels. We all know forest oil was in December. We even had a celebration for that. ExxonMobil argues or posited that by 2025, they're going to commence production about 750,000 barrels per day. Just put that into perspective. That is almost 1 barrel per person per day. Almost. Now, many of the figures that I'll show you here today are based on projection because we're talking about the oil and gas sector that is relatively new. So my information gathered from the IMF, so they had presented a report, paper 4, on Guyana and projection of its oil and gas. And they've estimated for this year, 2020, our economy will grow by 86%. Now, mind you, in the past, our average growth over the last 4 years was about 3.54%. And we're going to grow this year by 86%. The question is, are we ready for that? Ready or not, it's going to come. So, in addition to the non-oil GDP, this is outside of oil, agriculture, tourism, the other sectors. Those sectors are expected to also expand to about 5% in 2024. When you look at consumer prices, that's also expected to increase. So, yes, people are going to get more money, they're going to spend more, and that's going to help price to increase. So we have to be careful with oil revenues, spending, and the whole notion of inflation. Government revenues, we have to talk about this. After all, many of the developmental aspect comes from the government. Roads, the East Coast, the Chedichagan expansion. We're thinking about the Harbor Bridge, the new Harbor Bridge. We're talking about all of those bypass, schools, the specialty hospital, I've seen it being thrown around now. But all of this is going to come from money, from taxes. And so what is expected in terms of the tax discussion? Tax is expected to increase significantly. And I want to draw emphasis on something based on the first graph, which is the tax revenue, that you will see extended beyond 2017 to 2024. Consumption tax is going to remain above income tax. Why is that so? Need to ponder. The other thing is, when we look at export values, net export, and this is merchandise exports, what are you seeing? Bauxite maintains its exports level somewhere around, in terms of values, 100 million US. Maintain it, extended to 2024. But with the oil and gas sector, that's going to take off. And look at what is going to happen to our net export value. Our net export value is currently in the negative, which means importation is greater than exports. Now, what is the problem here? The problem is that there's the likely impact on our foreign exchange. There's the likely impact on our currency strengthening, one. There's the likely impact that it affects our exports, because a stronger currency is not always good for exportation. The IMF will tell you this. When we went through our structural adjustment program, that's what they said. Devalue your currency. So we have to bear in mind what is going to happen. Now, all of this in the context of what? What is the social position? And I want to draw emphasis on the poverty rates. You have about 36%, round it off, about 37% of our people that are considered to be poor. Extreme poverty, this is really, really poor people, 19%. We're talking about oil and gas. Now, all of this occurred whilst we had bauxite. What oil and gas is supposed to do? Well, everybody thinks it's the magic wand. When we wave it, poverty is eliminated. But we'll get to that. Here is the sad reality that no one is really talking about or talking loud about. You have an emerging sector, and approximately 48% of your people have primary education. You have a sector that is going to demand technical skills. Who's talking? Who's pushing that agenda? You know what it means? Possibility that the people who are going to fill those jobs are going to be people from outside our country. We have to have this discussion. In terms of the emerging oil and gas sector, we have to talk about it in the context of the contract. And I know many of you have some burning issues about the contract. But according to the discussion, you have 75% of the production will go to cost recovery from the firm, for Exxon. Of the 25% that remains, 50-50, 12.5 goes to the government of Guyana, and then we have a 2% royalty. In the contract, the company also agrees to provide training and hiring Guyanese labor, also taking the environmental impact together. So what can we learn? And this is the wrapping up of my presentation here. This is a couple of things that we have to bear in mind. That one, there will be a glorious time period for our oil and gas sector, just as we had with bauxite. We have to ensure that we prepare our people for the after. You remember when they tried to raise the price in Linden in terms of energy, electricity would happen? We didn't adequately prepare our people for that. We got to encourage them to save a little bit of their income. It's not going to always be glorious. We have to establish the Petroleum Commission, just as we did with the GGMC, to oversee. We need an independent body looking at that sector. We have to ensure that the oil and gas sector respect our people, respect procedure, and respect whatever local content framework we're going to advance. I say that in light of the discussion with Rousseau. I think it was a disregard, total disregard for the process and the procedure. And here, I will end my discussion here, hoping to have a little bit more questions as we move forward.